Ladies and gentlemen, I was smiling when talking to Mr. President. I said that I would very much like for us to set up a permanent American bases in Poland, which we would call Fort Trump. And I firmly believe that this is possible. I am convinced that such a decision lies both in the Polish interest as well as in the interest of the United States. Poland is an attractive country.
Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. With me today is Daniel McAdams, our co-host. And Daniel, good to see you.
How are you this morning, Dr. Paul?
I'm doing very well.
Good.
But you know, I imagine you've heard that we might have a new military base overseas.
All right.
Yeah. Fort Trump. You know what I was thinking about, in trying to plan for the program, I'm wondering if we might get an invitation for the grand opening. Come over here and celebrate the Fort Trump base in Poland.
Yeah.
Holy man, what's going on here? But it reminds me of a little bit of politicizing, the whole issue of military bases. And that was when the conservatives wanted to be conservatives, and they wanted to get their credentials by closing down the military bases that we don't need. And of course, there was a lot of fanfare, but they really never saved a nickel. But their theory was that there were too many bases and too many were wasteful. And they found out that many they considered very wasteful were here in the United States, which probably makes some sense. I mean, I think they were there and they were probably political, and we weren't about to be invaded. But I actually disagreed with their process, because I said, well, if you're going to close down bases, close the bases down overseas first, and then deal with this later on. You can use the bases here at home as transition, then you won't get into these political fights of which bases get closed down. And yet nothing really came of that. There was no real changes. But this looks like they're getting closer to this. They've discussed this for a while. Poland. They want our air base, our base over there, military base. They're talking about putting 15,000 troops over there. We already rotate troops there. Hundreds of troops go in and out of there, so we have a presence there. And yet now, due to the president of Poland, he's really excited about this. And he says he's so excited that he'll even put in $2 billion to help build it. And I kept thinking, I wonder how rich this country is. Are they going to pop out and write a check for $2 billion? But he also added, and we'll buy a lot of weapons from you too. So there's a lot of things going on. There's oil that's part of this issue, and where the pipeline's going, and then there's this anti-Russia sentiment. Why let Russia make money selling gas to the Europeans? And the Europeans, they're distraught. They don't know what to do, because they don't want to be beholden to Russia, mainly because we don't like Russia and they have to go along with that. So they don't know what to do, so they have to be against a pipeline, coming in from Russia. So there's a mixture of people. There's the military-industrial complex, there's the deep state, there's the pipeline and the gas lines. And Trump has talked about it quite frequently about why don't we sell them the gas? And of course, geographically, I've often wondered, how could it be a better deal shipping natural gas from the United States versus a pipeline coming, from Russia? So it doesn't sound very market oriented. So it's up in the air, but the pipeline is moving along, and I think that there's a lot of things going on here, but I think it's probably the neocons are very much involved because it is antagonistic. It's defying the types of promises that were made about NATO, not putting troops close to the Russian border, and it is, and the Russians are saying, why are you doing this? That's a pretty good question. Why are we doing this? So I wanted to close the foreign bases back in the 1990s, and I certainly don't think it's a good idea to build it now. And yet, in the DOD budget this year, there's money in there to study this. So it's in process, and this is just more of this, and having a major press conference like this, they're allowing the American people to know, and the American people will maybe get a chance to say something about it, but most of them so far don't really care.
And anyone that thinks that U.S. military bases are there to protect America, or that our military budgets to protect America, this is not, building bases overseas doesn't protect America at all. But, this base would serve no military purpose. putting 15,000 troops on the border with Russia, if Russia decided one morning, you know what, it's time for us to invade the European landmass, we want to take it all, what are they going to do with it if they take it? If they decide it one morning, 15,000 Americans with a couple of tanks is not going to deter them in any slightest. If they do something so crazy and stupid, they're not going to think about 15,000 troops. So what it is a symbolic gesture. And you think about it, Poland, the capital of Poland, Warsaw, the Warsaw Pact. So building a U.S. base in Warsaw, the Warsaw Pact, is a symbolic sort of in-your-face to the Russians here 30-some years after the end of the Cold War. You know, it right. Makes no sense.
You know, and the question always should be, wonder what the people think, you know. And I did come across one interview with a reporter in Poland, and she was not over the top one way or the other, but she says, I never hear any fear expressed in Poland that Russia's about to invade them. So they were very lukewarm on the necessity of this. But they make it sound like, well, it's a danger, and they're pumping it up as a danger to Poland, and that's the reason they have to do it. So they were saying that you know, there's no need for this. They need this right now. But what I'd like to know, she gave a hint that the people there weren't too worried. But I'd like to know, really, what do the Polish people think?
Yeah.
It's more people. You know, the other argument against it, from their point of view, is if we get into a skirmish with Russia in Syria, you know, something like that, maybe they'll just target our troops up there.
Yeah,
so they're more
convenient.
endangered for doing this. And I often thought all of Eastern Europe put themselves in greater danger. But what if we could get a sense of feeling about the American people? You know, a really decent poll. Oh, what do you think? You know, just with the information they have now, what do you think about the idea of spending billions of dollars and putting 15,000 troops, you know, into Poland and worrying about the borders over there? Now, of course, you could always slant the question and say, at the same time, look at our own borders. You know?
Yeah. Well, 2 out of 3 Americans in a poll we cited a few weeks ago were in favor of getting along better with Russia. So this certainly wouldn't be that. So I think we have an indication. But, you know, the thing about it is, now, this is President Duda of Poland. They had a nice press conference. We put it up on as we started the show. He said, here's what he said: Poland is willing to undertake and finance preparatory activities and the cost of preparing a place where the Americans can be stationed. Washington would then pick up the cost of the base contents. So he's willing to throw in $2 billion to pick a place and get it all sorted out and everything. So we started thinking, Poland doesn't, I mean, it's not as bad as it was in '89. It's not as strapped, but it's no Switzerland. So I looked a little bit into the numbers. Their external debt, their debt is $290 billion. So they owe a lot of money, 54.1% of the GDP. They're doing better than us, though. We're 105.4% of GDP in debt. So they're not as bad as us. But their average income is $18,900 a year per family. And the OECD average is $30,000. So they're definitely lower. They're not as wealthy as the rest of Europe. And here you have their president saying, you know, we're going to put up $2 billion. And you talk about, I wonder what the Poles think. I wonder what they would think about spending that kind of money.
That's right. And it's always more than they estimate, because once you station 15,000 troops, then the families have to go, and you have to build facilities for the families. So it can be very, very expensive. And then there's this old-fashioned thing of inflation. Even when a hammer has gone up from $5 to $25, for the military it goes up to $500. You know, the whole thing is, once military spend it. And we're not going to, you know, even if they say, well, this will be good for the economy. Well, the Polish think it's going to be good there for their economy, but the military-industrial complex thinks it is. Not only the weapons, but all the equipment, the building, and, you know, our contractors will go over there. So it's all really ingrained Keynesian, military Keynesianism, military spending that they want, and they sincerely believe that this is good for the economy. They never ask, you know, instead of what? You know, we spend, let's say that this creeps up. It could easily go into the many, many billions of dollars. And they say, well, we stimulated this company, and this company made this and that. But what if that money had been left into the economy? What else could have happened to it? They never ask the question, where would that money have gone if we wouldn't have dumped it down a drain? And that, to me, is what that is. You mentioned you didn't think it helped our national security. I think it endangers our national security. We're more vulnerable. We're going to have more antagonism. Just think of some of the places in the Philippines and Japan, how they finally get tired of us and the troops get into problems. So I think it's a negative. And I remember the statement by bin Laden that he was so pleased that once we responded to 9/11, we went in the Middle East. You're just making an easy target for yourself. And I think that is. It's more antagonism, but it is to keep the stirring goes. And Trump is right in the middle of this. One day, in the past especially, he loves the Russians, and now he has to hate the Russians, and he's probably in between someplace. I think he wants to get along with the Russians more than he is showing. His policies aren't in the same way. So I think there has to be a lot of pressure put on him to toe the line by the deep state.
Yeah, and you mentioned the military-industrial complex, and of course our military-industrial complex is going to love it. They'll put $2 billion toward the base. Well, we'll see it when the check clears. However, we'll be picking up a lot of costs, as you point out. But the other thing that happens is that the very well-connected people in those countries will benefit big time. They're the ones that are going to be fixers on the ground. They're going to be involved in the business on the ground, doing all sorts of things. And I lived in Hungary when Hungary was joining NATO, and I saw exactly so many of the well-connected Hungarian elites. This is the time when the former communists were in charge. So many well-connected elites had gotten contracts from Lockheed Martin and all kinds of very well-paid things to lobby and do PR. Interestingly enough, all of these guys were former commies, and all of a sudden they switched and they were so pro-NATO because they were getting rich. So there's a whole cadre of people on the ground who are going to make a lot of money from something like this. And the average Pole is not going to see his life improved, as you say.
And it's a mixed bag for a lot of people because some want to be antagonistic toward Russia. And yet at the same time, the Europeans are dependent on Russia, the Nord Stream pipeline, and they want to make Nord Stream 2, and even more so, piping that gas in there. They say, oh, well, we don't want to be overly dependent on Russia. But, it's so anti-market, what's going on. And some people, and even our government, and Trump says it, we don't want you to be dependent on Russia. But at the same time, because we have sanctions on Russia, I think he made a statement yesterday. He said, "Oh, but we're not going to hold it against you if you happen to be doing something for the pipeline." But it's such a mess. But we still depend on the Russian rockets to get to the space stations. Yeah. It's sort of a crazy thing. That's what's going on.
Well, I think a lot of what drives what's happening with this base and related issues is sort of the geopolitics of Central Europe. And you have called the Visegrad Four countries, Poland, Hungary, Czech Republic, and Slovakia. And they've been at odds with Brussels, especially over the immigration policy, and in a broader way, the issue of sovereignty. They were under the boot of the Soviets for a long time. So when they regained their sovereignty, unfortunately, they surrendered a lot of it to Brussels. And now they've got some leaders elected there who are more willing to assert that sovereignty, certainly Orban in Hungary, but they don't like the hordes of foreigners coming in, and so they're sort of joined this way. And it puts them at odds with Brussels, and so they're looking to sort of balance, they're looking for ways of having new relationships. And I think Poland and Hungary, to a degree, have both reached out to the Trump administration. Poland, for historical reasons, is very Russophobic, and it won't reach out to Russia. Hungary, on the other hand, is trying to balance. Viktor Orban was actually meeting with Putin yesterday, and they're trying to find some sort of a balance between the two. But that sort of special geopolitics of Central Europe, I think, is a big factor in Poland's move, looking for some kind of a protector as it positions itself against Brussels.
Well, there was a similar situation in Ukraine, too. The East sympathizing with Russia and the West sympathizing with NATO.
Yeah.
And instead of allowing the benefits coming from the disintegration of the Soviet system, they have to rebuild this animosity and draw these lines. And then we have some agreements with NATO, and then we don't live up to those agreements. And at the time, we were going to get along with Russia, and would never move up the NATO line to their borders, and we go and do it. So it's evident to me that we're more antagonistic than we have to be, you know, and then the Russians have to sort of smooth this over so that it doesn't get worse. But there's still a lot of economic interchange. This is why I was surprised it's gotten this far along, because there has been a fair amount of interreaction with the Russians in economics, you know, for oil and different things. Yeah. But it looks like antagonism and the Cold War is more important to these individuals than the economic benefits of trade.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, I would just, if we're ready to close it out, I would just, you know, ask our viewers to think about how would we feel, this is Dr. Paul always says, and it's always appropriate, how would we feel if a hostile power built bases on our border? We wouldn't like it. How would it possibly make us any safer to build the borders on, build bases on someone else's border or have them built on ours? It doesn't do anything for stability. We've already blundered into wars in the past by guaranteeing Poland, so it's not really a good move. If you also, I would encourage everyone to subscribe to our YouTube channel and have your friends subscribe and watch the show, and we appreciate our viewers very much. Dr. Paul?
Thank you, and I want to thank our viewers for tuning in today. And obviously there's a little bit of, I think, humor with this, even though it's very, very serious. I still think it's humorous to think about Fort Trump in Poland. But in a way, that ought to wake up a lot of people. And I don't know, obviously I can't believe they could be serious, and yet the president of Poland suggests it. But it's sort of, I guess, his technique of buttering up, and because he was really, really anxious to get along with Trump, because they want this. It was very, very important to him. And you wonder what is his motivation, you know, his strong motivation to do something rather than a more balanced approach, because he doesn't represent all the people of Poland, I do not believe. There are some there that wouldn't be looking to be more antagonistic. Well, anyway, the answer to this is non-intervention, mind our own business, stay out of the affairs of other countries, be willing to trade with people and talk to people, and believe me, that's the way to go. And unfortunately, we seem to drift away from that policy, which has served us well in the past. I want to thank everybody for tuning in today to the Liberty Report. Please come back soon.